Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion. Today's poem comes to us from Sylvia Plath, and the title of the poem is Morning Song. And I'm going to warn you right off the bat here, I almost always screw up the poetry readings, but this one, I'm definitely going to ruin. I'm going to ruin this one hard because this poem has all the rhythm of imagism, and it's going to destroy me when I try to read it out loud. Here we go. Morning Song by Sylvia Plath. Love set you going like a fat gold watch. The midwife slapped your foot soles, and your bald cry took its place among the elements. Our voices echo, magnifying your arrival. New statue. In a drafty museum, your nakedness shadows our safety. We stand round blankly as walls. I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. All night your moth breath flickers among the flat pink roses. I wake to listen. A far sea moves in my ear. One cry, and I stumble from bed, cow-heavy and floral in my Victorian nightgown. Your mouth opens clean as a cat's. The window, square, whitens and swallows its dull stars. And now you try your handful of notes. The clear vowels rise like balloons. I think a good place to start with this is you've never read this before. You may have read this poem, but you've never read this as a poem before. This is not something stereotypical. This is not something which is easy to replicate. This is not something that you can just pick up and find. So what's this poem about? I have to be very clear with you. Sylvia Plath is still, and I've practiced Plath. I've tried with Plath. Sylvia Plath's poetry is still something that takes me at least 3 readings to really get any type of purchase upon. Sylvia Plath's poems, to me, are words on a page, at least the first 2 times I read them. This poem, notwithstanding. Her language is very difficult for me, and so 100% honesty, I never really paid a whole lot of service to the idea of gender defining a reading. I didn't really get it. I didn't understand exactly what it meant. And it's not because I didn't read women. My first favorite writer ever was Emily Dickinson. And in Emily Dickinson's words, I never felt alienated from the poem itself. I never felt outside the text. I never felt other from the words. There are things that Emily Dickinson described, and speakers who were undoubtedly effeminate, speakers who were undoubtedly women in Emily Dickinson's poetry, but never, I understood it, right? I never felt as if the text were meant for someone else, some other type of someone. Sylvia Plath, I feel that way about. And maybe I'm not being fair to the text. Maybe I'm not being fair to the difficulty of the poetry. But I think I am. I think so. The reason I think it has to do with gender is that I've known so many women who identify with Sylvia Plath the way that someone hits the weights, with the urgency that someone becomes a power lifter. They identify with Sylvia Plath. You know, CrossFit people. How do you know someone does CrossFit? Don't worry, they'll tell you, right? That's the sort of identification that I've many women that I've known have with Sylvia Plath. And I don't get it. Once I intellectualize the Sylvia Plath poetry, I really enjoy it. But until that point, it is completely foreign to me. This poem is about a baby. More specifically, it's about parenthood. More specifically yet, it's about motherhood. And though there is the I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. That stanza's in there. But you could read that literally or ironically. You could read that, it's written ironically, right? I'm no more your mother than X, despite the fact that, yeah, this is the mother figure. But if you read it literally, it could be a stranger or it could be the father, right? But we've got this stanza here. One cry and I stumble from the bed, cow heavy and floral in my Victorian nightgown. Your mouth opens clean as a cat's. So that pretty well cements the fact that what we're dealing with here probably is the mother. But this was written by Sylvia Plath. Of course it's the mother. That doesn't have to be, right? That doesn't have to be. Emily Dickinson's I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room, is not really written by a dead person, right? So the speaker does not have to be the author. So it would be possible that this poem was being written from another's perspective, possibly a father figure, but that does not seem to be the case. Now, what I want to talk about really with this poem is maybe a larger observation about Sylvia Plath. So I want to read something from my trusty Dictionary of Literary and Thematic Terms by Edward Quinn. This is a definition of existentialism. A philosophical and literary movement rooted in the 19th century that came into prominence in the aftermath of World War II. This historical context helps to explain the broad appeal of the movement. Existentialism mirrored the spiritual crisis that had become palpable in the wake of the war. Alienation, the loss of sustaining religious beliefs, the sense of anxiety and guilt, the growing conviction that life was, at bottom, meaningless. All of these attitudes and ideas were given powerful and explicit voice in existentialist thought. Then it has a subheading after this, philosophy. This is talking about the philosophy of existentialism, not the criticism of existentialism. Philosophy. Central to existentialism is a critique of the traditional idea that within each human being there is an essence, a universal defining characteristic that is independent of existence. In place of this conception of humanity as a shared collective essence, existentialism focuses on the fact that we create ourselves through our choices, that one's individual quote-unquote essence has nothing to do with is nothing more than the sum total of one's existence. The existential formula expressing this conception is, quote, existence precedes essence, end quote. One 19th century progenitor of existentialism was Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish theologian who depicted the individual as estranged from God and needing to make an absurd quote-unquote leap of faith. The other forerunner was Friedrich Nietzsche, the prophet of both existentialism and postmodernism, also nihilism, guys, who proclaimed, I'd take that back. Who proclaimed the death of God. Kierkegaard and Nietzsche represent the two strains of the movement that were to persist into the 20th century religious and humanistic existentialisms. The religious strain attempted to demythologize the New Testament, while humanistic existentialism celebrated the strength of the human mind, capable of confronting the ultimate meaningless nature of existence. The subsequent development of existentialist thought grew out of the philosophical method called phenomenology. Phenomenon. Dot, 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 dot. Phenomenon. Dot, 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 dot. As developed by the German philosopher Edmund Husserl. Husserl's method consisted of a rigorous attempt to describe what happens when the subject perceives an object. One example might be to describe what happens when a person reads the writing on a page. Husserl's method was adopted by his pupil, Martin Heidegger. In Beginning and Time, 1927, Heidegger provides a phenomenological description of human existence, which he calls Dasein, being there. Dasein is a time-bound being who is aware of and riddled with anxiety by the knowledge of his own death. In the attempt to avoid awareness, Dasein uses language to shield himself, thus living an inauthentic life. A life of denial characterized by depersonalizing generalizations. An example of the latter is the statement, "All men are mortal." The truth rendered abstract by unreal and universal formulation. In saying all men, we arm ourselves against the reality of I am mortal. Heidegger's arcane and difficult ideas later to form the basis of hermeneutics were adapted and made more accessible by Jean-Paul Sartre, whose work bridged the gap between literature and philosophy, kind of. So when I read Sylvia Plath, it is to me inseparable from the idea of existentialism. There is in Plath, so oftentimes what we're doing with poetry is we're taking two things and saying how alike they are. My love is a red, red rose, right? Not really. Your love is not actually a red rose. It's not really there. But what we're doing is we're going to say, hey, my love is like a red, red rose, right? Because it smells so sweet. But if you touch it just wrong, there's that prickly part, right? What you're doing is you're putting comparisons side by side to make a symbol. I want you to listen to this poem one more time. And there are images here, but the symbolism, I think, is a bit different than what we normally see. Love set you going like a fat gold watch. The midwife slapped your foot soles, and your bald cry took its place among the elements. Our voices echo, magnifying your arrival. New statue. In a drafty museum, your nakedness shadows our safety. We stand round blankly as walls. I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. All night your moth breath flickers among the flat pink roses. I wake to listen. A far sea moves in my ear. One cry, and I stumble from bed, cow-heavy and floral in my Victorian nightgown. Your mouth opens clean as a cat's. The window square whitens and swallows its dull stars. And now you try your handful of notes. The clear vowels rise like balloons. So let's just pick the last one. The clear vowels rise like balloons. Okay, so you've got a comparison there, but what we're doing is not trying to make it more familiar. What we're doing with that comparison is making something more strange. What we're doing with one cry and I stumble from bed, cow heavy. Cow heavy. This is not a phrase used to make our speaker more relatable. It's used to distance our speaker from the norm. I rise, not motherly, cow heavy, right? I do not prance into the room in jocund fashion. I stumble from bed. So, in a lot of Sylvia Plath's poetry, at least to my experiences as a reader, what happens is the poet succeeds not at making something familiar, but at making it new again. And so that's one of the sort of literary thrusts of her century, right? Make something new again. Not make it familiar, not make it relatable, but make it new. And in this way, oftentimes Sylvia Plath's poetry, to me, feels like othering, making something or someone other, which is when you take a poem like Morning Song, oftentimes when criticism of Sylvia Plath's poetry is brought up, and I don't mean criticism as in this is wrong, that is bad. I mean criticism as in sort of the encompassing discussion around a poem or in Sylvia Plath's case, these poems. When the discussion is brought up around the poems, almost as inescapable as bringing up Ted Hughes, almost as inescapable as bringing up Plath's father, is bringing up Plath's mental health. And I can see that argument here. I can see that argument here, especially when what we're talking about is motherhood. Not often is it that motherhood or one's own child is put into these terms. This is in that way a massive othering the speaker from her child, othering the speaker from the idea of motherhood. But that othering does not need to be disrespectful or disjointed. Oftentimes in existentialist literature, there is sort of this great, what am I doing here moment, where the setting or the theme or the main act of the speaker, the main character, is sort of reimagined by that character from a distance. Oftentimes, that reimagining is the breaking point, sort of, in the story, whereby that character ends up winning the day or losing the day, right? So in The Stranger, my mom died today. Or was it yesterday? I don't remember, right? This is such a focal point in the main character's life, and it's the opening statement, but he can't really remember what's going on there. There is a great distance from that thing which is changing. in the realization of this change. So in literary fiction, the realization of that change normally evolves into some inner change in the character versus normally an existentialist theme in a genre type of book, wherein that moment of distance from the thing happening offers a clear insight to the character. A moment of existentialism in Star Wars Episode 1. Darth Maul flips over Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi, in the midst of the great battle where, spoilers, he lost his teacher, has this moment of clarity as Darth Maul is jumping over him. I'm just going to cut him in half. And he does, right? So that is just, it's a stupid example, I know, but it's the only thing I could come up with so fast. That is a moment where the character is offered an insight from without. Sylvia Plath, in this poem, is offering sort of an outsight from within. Sylvia Plath is the speaker, the poet. The speaker here is the mother, but is offering you those terms in every way but the terms for which you're ready. And it's, as someone who will never be a mother, I could read all of the lovey-dovey, held my baby, warmth of flesh on flesh type stuff and never been any closer to being a mother. But by being outside of that, I am the outsider here. And Sylvia Plath, or our speaker, I keep doing this, our speaker comes to my side and looks in and is offering these terms. So I don't think that it's necessary to really evoke the mental health of the author here, because it is not a mentally defunct thing to be offering. It is not necessarily the traditional sense, pardon me, that we get from poetry, perhaps, whereby things are made more universal. Here, we're getting poetry that makes things odd, but thereby allows access. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. I hope to have you back for the next poetry discussion that I do on this channel, poetry review that I do on this channel, short story discussion, short story review, novel read along, opening paragraph discussion, all that stuff that I do here on this channel. Make sure you hit that like button if you do like this type of thing, because it really does help me out here on the channel. If you are not subscribed, if you are here by chance but not design, consider hitting that subscribe button and sticking around for the rest of the stuff that I do on this channel. And yeah, like I say, I hope to have you back for the next video. Get lost.